Kirby Smart, releasing a statement saying, quote, "The charges announced today are deeply concerning, especially as we are still struggling to cope with the devastating loss of two beloved members of our community. We will continue to cooperate fully with the authorities while supporting these families and assessing what we can learn from this horrible tragedy." Let's welcome in somebody on the ground in Athens, Jordan Hill of Dawgs247. Jordan, appreciate you joining the show today. Definitely a very important person to get perspective from. First and foremost, as we know, Jalen Carter is headed back to Athens. Is there anything new to report out of Athens at this hour?
Not at this point. Before we came on, I popped on just to check the jail log, make sure he had not been booked. To this point, he has not. Just going to keep an eye on that for the next day or so to see if that occurs. But like you mentioned, Emily, he had put out a statement saying that it was his intent to go back to Athens to basically take care of these charges. In that statement, he made it clear that he felt like, the truth would come out. He felt like there were inaccuracies reported. Said sort of a blanket statement about what he felt was unfair to him. But we'll follow this. It's just sort of a wait and see as far as when Jalen gets back to Athens and when he is booked on those two misdemeanor charges.
I know you've been very busy today, just releasing a column not too long ago about all of this. And something that you mentioned is that people could wind up losing their jobs by the time this is all said and done. So what's the fallout? What effect does all of this have on the Georgia program internally right now?
Well, it's something that we're going to watch, and there's nothing that I've seen that makes me think someone specifically will lose their job, but they know without a doubt that there has to be things put in place. I mean, that there was protocol that was broken. We had a chance to talk to Athletic Director Josh Brooks a few weeks ago, and the accident was one of the discussion points, and he talked about that things were not followed properly. Specifically, the car that Chandler LeCroy, the recruiting staffer who was killed, it should have been turned back in. The vehicle should not have been on the road at 2:30, 2:45 in the morning. Protocol was not followed. She was obviously still in that vehicle. And as we learned today, she was drunk and she was over twice the legal limit. So it's a situation where at the very least, protocol has to change. And that the way things internally have worked, that someone has to look and say these things have to be, there have to be checks and balances to avoid a situation like this. Because more bigger than anything, and I made sure to make this point in the column, I mean, two young lives were lost because of this accident, a 24-year-old and a 20-year-old. It was a situation that should have been avoided. And, you hope coming out of this that, people will be smart about putting in the proper checks and to put people in place to make sure something like this never happens again.
I mean, anytime you have something like this, whether or not making a change of personnel is going to curb or alter future behavior, you're going to have a fall guy. So I totally agree with Jordan. Like, somebody's going to lose their job over this, and maybe should. Jordan, I had a follow-up for you, if I could. Carter, in his statement, had talked about exonerating himself and clearing up a lot of these media inaccuracies. Given the nature of the reporting, which appears to be mostly based on video, what do you think he's getting at here? Like, is he trying to claim he wasn't driving, or what? Like, what have you heard anything on the ground there that would make you think he's going to be exonerated from these?
Yeah, that part of it, and some of us around the program had kind of talked about it today, not really understanding what exactly he's talking about. And to me, it's a statement that it kind of feels like just sort of an open-ended, the truth will come out. And I can't say specifically what he's getting at. He didn't really say specifically with his statement, oh, well, this was false or that was false. I think it's something that is just going to play out, and that's part of it. That I think people are beginning to understand. And I think people knew when this accident happened, before Jalen Carter's name ever was linked to this wreck on January 15th, that this wasn't going to go away anytime soon. And the developments today make that all the more clear, that this is going to be something we're going to be talking about for quite a while to come. And, I don't know how long this is going to go out, how long this is going to play out. But it's definitely something that, especially with the news today, we know that there's going to be further reporting done and continuing to follow this story as more things develop.
What's next in this process? We've heard, his statement saying that he is going back and is going to try to fight this. What sort of news should we be expecting to come down next?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just going to be for him to essentially turn himself in, that he'll be booked, and I would imagine he'll be released not long after that. And then from that point, I think we're all just kind of waiting to see what does happen. I know just from dealing with Georgia and dealing with the university, I don't expect them to say very much. They're going to do their part to just sort of step back, and it's what they did during the actual investigation when the accident first happened. There wasn't a whole lot of talk. There was a statement that day, I believe, from Kirby Smart, also just from the UGA Athletics as a whole, just a statement they put out. I don't intend I don't anticipate, I should say, that we'll see Kirby Smart saying very much other than the statement that he put out today. And then the next time we're going to talk to him is going to be at Pro Day, which I believe is going to be March 15th. And you'll probably get questions in them, but I'd have to imagine that Kirby's going to be very tight-lipped about it. He may even read a statement beforehand and say, "I'm not taking any more questions after this." It's hard to say, but again, we're going to be following it. But it's a situation where, one, I don't expect a whole lot to come from Georgia on this other than what came out today. And two, we're just going to kind of follow the legal system and see what comes next, specifically when it comes to Jalen Carter and when he arrives back in Athens.
And you mentioned the processes that could potentially change internally, externally, and optically. Obviously, there's we're talking about it on this show. They're talking about it on all the draft shows. It's a big deal in terms of what it means for the Georgia program. So in your opinion, as this is still kind of breaking and developing, what sort of impact and what sort of effect has this news story in particular had or will have on the Georgia program as a whole?
Well, it's going to be interesting because you think about, if any of you watched today Nolan Smith talk about Devin, he was very emotional, and you understand why. I mean, this was a teammate again. I like stressing to people about this situation. Take football aside. This is a 20-year-old kid who died in this accident along with a 24-year-old in Chandler LeCroy. To me, more than anything, I'm very interested in just seeing what we hear from current players, because they're all dealing with this too. And some of these people, we've learned a little bit more, and I'm sure more details will come out about who was there when the accident happened, who was, on the scene. Those details have kind of trickled out. What's going to happen from that standpoint? And then two, Kirby Smart, you look at where Georgia is right now, having won back-to-back national championships. How does he handle this? I mean, even more on just the emotional side of losing a player. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think Georgia has had a player die while he was the head coach, and I'm not sure about his time at Alabama before that. But it's a lot, and it's a situation too that, again, you kind of have to balance when you look at this, the emotional side of it of losing a player, and also understand that there are legal ramifications coming out of this. So it's something that is not going to go away. I'm sure we're going to talk about it going into spring practice. I'll be interested just to see what access looks like, especially dealing with some of the players and some of the coaches that we'll get to talk to. But again, sort of like I said a few minutes ago, this is just not going to be something that goes away. And the more details and any more developments that come out of what we learned on Wednesday, that's only going to add to it and be something that will break down further going forward.
When you and set aside the legal issues, you have to also discuss everybody's mental health involved. You got the coaching staff who lost a player and a recruiting staffer. You have the guys in the locker room. And we tend to, in the game of football, try to just get back to business as usual. But sometimes you got to talk to somebody. If you've ever been around a group of football players who's lost a teammate tragically, this is something that can take a large, large toll, on the group as a whole. It can take a lot on coaches. When you're coaching and you're recruiting a guy and you're going and talking to his family, you're not wanting to have to call that parent and say your child is dead. It's a lot of things that go into that. I hope that everybody's mental health is okay and that they all get the help and support that they need from that perspective of the issue.
For sure.
So,
and
Jordan,
I think that, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, bud.
No, go ahead, Jordan.
I was just going to say, we've heard bits and pieces. Again, there's not been a ton of availability since the season, but Warren McClendon talked about that at the Senior Bowl, said that, he had talked to people kind of helping him through because he was in that car. He was one of the two people who survived the car where Devin Willock and Chandler LeCroy were killed. And even again, the people that weren't there that night. I mean, the teammates, the other offensive linemen, the people that just knew Devin, even, some of the Georgia men's basketball players. I think about Jabri Abdur-Rahim. He's from New Jersey, and they struck up a friendship because that's where Devin Willock was from. So there was a lot of people who were affected by this who knew Devin and who knew Chandler as well. And again, I mean, like Carl said, I mean, it's all about making sure everybody's taken care of because it's a very traumatic situation. And it's something that I hope everybody kind of understands how important that is going forward.
Jordan had mentioned that to his knowledge, Kirby Smart had not been on a team that had a player tragically die. I want to make sure I have the timeline right on this, but Kirby Smart was the DC at Valdosta State in 2001 and then became a graduate assistant at Florida State in 2002. So that spring, Devon Darling, actually, one of their star receivers, collapsed and died during workouts. Like I would expect Kirby Smart to give Mickey Andrews, the former defensive coordinator there, a call and guys that he's still close with from that early 2000 Florida State staff and say, how'd you guys handle this after that, right? Like what obviously you bring in grief counselors, you bring in mental health experts. From a football standpoint, how do you handle this, right? And I don't know. This is tough, man.
Jordan,
absolutely,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say it's very tough, and it's one of those situations where, especially even us as writers, I'd only talked to Devin once or twice, but it kind of puts things in perspective, and you think about the relationships that everybody in the program had with both Devin and Chandler. And you make sure to kind of keep that in mind, especially when you're reporting out, what happened on January 15th and everything that's happened since.
What's the mood amongst the fan base right now? You're on Dogs247. I'm sure you see the message boards and all the conversations that are happening there on Twitter. I mean, everywhere. Well, can you kind of encapsulate what the mood is right now as this news broke today?
Well, I think it was a bit of surprise. I mean, I don't think that there was a ton of connection to Jalen Carter and this accident. I do think there have been reports in the weeks after the accident that, Jalen maybe had been headed to a Waffle House, which is where it was reported that the group was headed when the accident happened, and that maybe Jalen had come back to be on the scene. It wasn't really clear. I do think that there were people that were frustrated, and I really do understand this part of it, of the timing. I mean, that Jalen, when this broke, was probably 15, 20 minutes away from talking to media in Indianapolis, and I think that there was some questions of why was the timing what it was. And, I can't speak to that, and I try to look, on the side of understanding that a investigation in an accident like this is going to take a while. That the timing really had nothing to do with Jalen being at the combine, and that it was just a situation that played out the way it did. And there are people who obviously in this fan base who understand the kind of player Jalen is and hopes that he gets to prove that at the next level. We'll see how things play out. It's one of those situations that it's so hard to kind of balance talking about Jalen, who's a very good football player, but also understanding this is a very serious situation and one we want to see play out before we kind of dive into it any further.
Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show today, providing your perspective. Everyone be sure to check out Dogs247 for all things Georgia, especially right now with so much happening, so many question marks that we still need to answer. Also, check out the column that Jordan has right now. It's called, quote, "Don't Lose Sight During a Dark Day" for Georgia football. Go check that out. Really, really great work there.